During the Second World War, Bosnian Muslims served in two different divisions of the Waffen-SS, the SS-Handschar and the SS-Kammer. And did you know that the SS-Handschar staged a mutiny, the one and only Waffen-SS mutiny that occurred throughout the Second World War? In this video, you're gonna learn everything you need to know about the SS-Handschar. Keep watching! Good to have you back on the channel. If you are new to this channel, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher and I love to cover history. And you know what I also love? Coffee. You can buy me a coffee. See the link below and somewhere over here, so you can support the channel. And by the way, if you have not subscribed yet, please do so and also hit that notification bell. So what is today the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina was back in the day a part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. In the region lived mostly Bosnian Muslims and Serbs, but also Croats. During the 1930s, the Yugoslav government redrew the Bosnian map by dividing the territory into different provinces, banats, and removed traces of the old Bosnian borders. In 1939, the Cvetković-Maček Agreement, also known as the Sporazum, made a special Banovina of Croatia, but there was nothing of the sort for Bosnia. The next border change came during the Second World War, and that happened after April 1941, because then the Axis powers, led by Germany, invaded the kingdom and conquered it within 12 days. Around 40% of the former Yugoslav territory went to Croatia. Where it basically came down to was that what is now Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina were merged together in one state. And that state became known as the independent state of Croatia, led by Ante Pavelić, who was the leader of the Ustaša, the Croatian revolutionary movement. The Ustaša unleashed a wave of terror against the people they saw as inferior. I'm talking about the Serbs, the Jews and the Roma. And these were either killed or put into death camps. I covered this elaborate in other videos. See the description. I have a whole list of videos about Yugoslavia during World War II if you're interested. The Bosnian Muslims were not specifically targeted by the Ustaša. The Ustaša, they viewed them as Croats of the Islamic faith. And the idea was that one day these Croatian Muslims would convert to Catholicism. NDH leader Ante Pavelić made some empty gestures to include Bosnian Muslims. In Zagreb, he opened a mosque on one of the main squares on the place you see right here. The independent state of Croatia, the NDH, was highly unstable from the get-go. Due to the violence, citizens armed themselves and fought against one another, all based on ethnic lines. Massacres were committed. And also, Bosnian Muslims became the victim of this. Not necessarily by the Ustaša, but mostly by either the Chetniks, who are Serb-oriented, or by the communist-oriented partisans. The chaos for the NDH was also not beneficial for the Germans, because they needed to bring in troops to quell the unrest. And by now, Operation Barbarossa, the Axis invasion of the Soviet Union, was in full swing, and the Germans needed all the manpower they could get. So, Himmler, Reichsführer SS, came up with the idea to form a Bosnian Muslim Waffen-SS division. He therefore referred to some Italian anthropological research of the 1930s in which it was stated that the Bosnians descended from the Aryan Gothic invaders, and thus were not native Slavs. Now this was nonsense, but for the racially obsessed Nazis it would make recruiting more palatable. In December 1942, Himmler proposed the idea to Hitler, and Hitler formally agreed early 1943. The Bosnian Muslim Waffen-SS division was to be stationed in Yugoslavia to keep order. They, the Germans, saw the division's primary task as defeating the Chetniks and partisans and bringing peace to Bosnia. The first paragraph of the division's mission, contained in the directions for securing peace in Bosnia, read like a command. It stated, "The Führer demands that the SS volunteers of the division guard their homeland. The Reichsführer therefore ordered the SS division to build and secure peace in Bosnia." Himmler was anti-Christian, but he was not per se anti-Muslim. Besides, by tolerating Islam, he could get the help of Islamic leaders from the Middle East. And one key figure was Amin al-Husseini. He was an Arab nationalist and from Mandatory Palestine, then under British control. With Jewish immigration to the Mandate increasing in the interwar years, he founded an anti-Jewish organization which culminated in the 1920 riots when Jewish civilians were murdered during Passover. After this, he fled to French-controlled Syria. He was later pardoned and he returned to the Mandate with a vengeance, with his goal to stir up things again. He became the self-styled leader of anti-Semitism in the Arab world and inspired Muslims to attack Jews. In the 1930s, he sent praising telegrams to Adolf Hitler. Now, the British, they had enough of him, but before they could capture him, he already fled to Iraq. Wherever he went, disaster seemed to follow him. First in Iraq, which was invaded by the British, and later he went to Iran, which was also invaded by the Allies. At the end of 1941, he managed to evade capture. He arrived in Berlin and he was given a warm welcome by none other than the Führer of Germany, Adolf Hitler. He also met with Himmler and he had contacts with Adolf Eichmann, and they all shared their virulent anti-Semitism. He was given a villa in Berlin and paid a lot. 1942 was a quiet year for al-Husseini, but early 1943, the project of a Bosnian Waffen-SS division came on his radar, and he soon gave a speech in Berlin in which he stated the following. They, Bosnian Muslims, are being persecuted by the Serbian and communist bandits. They are being murdered, their possessions are robbed, and their villages are burned. England and its allies bear a great accountability before history for mishandling and murdering Europe's Muslims, just as they have done in the Arabic lands and in India. Now, by Serbian and communist bandits, he clearly meant the Chetniks and Tito's partisans. And clearly his time in exile had not mellowed his views on the British. To what extent the British are responsible for the wartime violence in Yugoslavia, it's up to debate, because there was a coup in Yugoslavia prior to the Axis invasion, which provoked it, and some people claim that the British were behind it. I actually made a video on just that. You can all find it in the description below. So Hitler was in favor of creating a Bosnian Muslim Waffen-SS division, but the Croatian authorities, they were not. They saw it as an attack on their sovereignty. Now, to what extent the independent state of Croatia was a sovereign state, well, I think you can guess. I made a video on that too, by the way. And the Croatian authorities, they wanted the Bosnian Muslims for their own army. To lead the recruitment for the Bosnian Waffen-SS division, SS Obergruppenführer Arthur Fleps was chosen. No, this is not Hitler, but he surely was inspired by Hitler, I think. He was an ethnic German from Romania, and he had served in the SS Prince Eugen and saw action during Operation White against the Yugoslav Partisans, and managed to make a deal with the Croatian authorities, and recruiting started in March 1943. The recruiting message was clear: let's relive the glorious tradition of the old Austro-Hungarian Bosnian regiments from the First World War and secure the Muslim communities in Bosnia. Al-Husseini toured through Bosnia in the first half of April to help with the recruitment. After 1 month, 8,000 men had volunteered, not the number the SS was hoping for, but substantial nonetheless. The motivation of Bosnian Muslims to join was simple, yet the situation was difficult. See, often when we talk about Yugoslavia in World War II, a lot of people say, very oversimplified, okay, Axis occupation, partisan liberation. The reality was much more complex. Some historians argue that what happened in Yugoslavia during World War II can best be described as a civil war that was fought along ethnic lines. Every time a faction in Yugoslavia, Chetnik, Ustaša, Partisan, attacked a Muslim community, more Bosnian Muslims came forward to serve as a volunteer. And their motivation was simple: to protect their communities from outside attacks. And they believed the best way of doing this was with German uniforms, training, and above all, weapons. Now, do notice also 10,000 Bosnian Muslims served in the ranks of the Yugoslav Partisans, who disregarded ethnicity to a great extent. And the new leader was picked on the 1st of April 1943, Herbert von Obwodza. On the 9th of August, he was replaced by Carl Gustav Zauberzweig. The following year, in June 1944, the last commander took office, Desiderius Ampel. The men of this Muslim SS division were never intended to fight on the Eastern Front. No, the idea was they were to be kept inside Yugoslavia, inside Bosnia, to fight against the partisans. The cadre came from the previous mentioned SS Prince Eugen. These were mostly ethnic Germans from the Banat region. Now the Germans, they hoped they could fill the ranks with many Bosnian Muslims that previously had served in the ranks of the Royal Yugoslav Army. But this army was highly Serbian dominated, so as a result there were not that many Bosnian Muslims that had served in this army. There were Bosnian Muslims that had served in the ranks of the Austro-Hungarian army during the First World War, but most of them were too old by now. So in the end there was a big proportion of ethnic Germans serving in the division, which was reliant on them. There are many debates on how to name this unit. The Ustasha did not want an overt reference to the Bosnian Muslim identity, but Himmler, he wanted just that. Names came and went, and it was only in May 1944 that the official name was given. The 13th Waffen Mountain Division of the SS-Handschar, first Croatian, or in short, the SS-Handschar. The term handžar itself is a derivation of the Arabic word for a long dagger, the khanjar, and was the official name of the weapon carried by pre-war Imperial Ottoman policemen. And this warlike nomenclature was echoed in the unit collar tab that included a scimitar gripped by a firm hand.
In Agram fand die feierliche Übernahme der ersten kroatischen SS-Freiwilligendivision statt.
A lot of attention was paid to the appearance of this unit. This Muslim unit had to be a benchmark for future other Muslim units. The men wore the basic field grey uniform together with Waffen-SS camouflage. A special collar patch was made which included a hand holding a curved scimitar, the proverbial handžar itself, together with a swastika. The national arm shield, the red-white checkered board of Croatia, was worn on the upper left arm below the Nazi eagle. I read some of the Kosovar Albanians wore the Albanian eagle they took from the SS Skanderbeg. Because it was a mountain division, they wore the Edelweiss insignia as well. Permission was given to wear a fez instead of a field cap. There was a field grey version and dark red for dress wear. Himmler wanted to adhere to local sensitivities, and thus this was allowed. Then why did there occur a mutiny within the ranks of the SS-Handschar? One of the main causes was the fact that they were initially stationed in France for training. Now do notice, for many German soldiers, France was like heaven compared to the dark realities of the Eastern Front. But this got a demoralizing effect for the men of the SS-Handschar, because they wanted to be in Bosnia to protect their local communities, and they obviously could not do so because they were stationed in France. Now, why did the Nazi authorities send this unit for training in France? Well, first of all, there were not sufficient training facilities in Croatia to do so, and also because they wanted to keep away from partisan threat. But it got a severe demoralizing effect on the men of the SS-Handschar, because for them the war meant the war in Bosnia and nothing else. And every time the news reached them of an attack on a Muslim community in Bosnia, albeit via the newspapers or via letters from home, because of this morale plummeted. But the real reason why a mutiny occurred, I get to that in a second. In the summer, the recruits were transported to France. They were quartered in south-central France with their HQ initially in Le Puy-en-Velay and later in Mende. For the next 3 months, they would be stationed in a huge rural area. For the recruits, the prosperous towns, mostly untouched by war, were a world away from what they were used to in Bosnia. For the local French people, it was an interesting sight as well. By now they were used to German uniforms, but not to German uniforms together with vases and prayer mats. Training soon began, and this wasn't ordinary Sunday drills. This was Waffen-SS training. The German methodology kicked in immediately as the young Bosnian men underwent this intense training. As ever with the Waffen-SS, the emphasis was on their three pillars of military excellence: physical fitness, weapon handling and marksmanship, and character development, this last being encouraged through self-reliance, initiative and aggression. Commander Carl Gustav Zaubezweig was not the ideal candidate on paper. He was not a member of the Nazi party. He did not speak Serbo-Croatian. He had never served in a mountain division. He had never served in the Balkans. He had never worked with foreign volunteers. And he had never commanded a division in the first place. Yet what he did have was combat experience, because he was a World War I veteran. He bonded with the unit pretty quickly. They nicknamed him the Schnellchen, the Speedy, because of his energy, and he reassured the men that they would be back in Bosnia soon. Zaubezweig had to construct the order of battle of the SS-Handschar. As a standard mountain division, it would have no armor, no tanks, and no assault guns. It was formed around two Gebirgsjäger or mountain infantry regiments, each of 3 battalions. Now, a normal Waffen-SS division had 3 regiments, but because of shortages there were only 2, and one was an artillery regiment which consisted of 4 battalions. The combat power of a German mountain division did not lay in its heavy equipment, for there was none, as this was redundant in the terrain mountain troops were trained to fight in. Its combat effectiveness lay in the human material with their superior motivation and training. And whereas German Gebirgsjäger mountain troops proved to be tough opponents for the Allies, this was not so the case with the SS-Handschar. The unit was already struggling to fill its command cadres of officers and NCOs. There was also a lack of material, as the division got the bottom shelf kit, which mostly consisted of captured weapons, albeit Czech, French or Soviet. And there were other reasons to worry. Tito's men could infiltrate the ranks of this division and sabotage material and morale. Because of this, the unit was not trained in Croatia but in France. The German authorities adopted a rigid observance of Islamic costumes as regarding food, alcohol and religious ceremony, along with the adaptation of some Bosnian dress. Yet, despite all this, a mutiny did occur. Why and how? The mutiny within the ranks of the SS-Handschar was started by 4 men. 2 were Muslim, 2 were Catholic. One used to be a member of the Yugoslav Communist Party. Another was severely anti-German, and another had fought in the ranks of the partisans, was captured, put in prison, and somehow be able to join this unit. The 4 men made contacts with the French resistance, and they forged a plan. A plan that can be called, well, ambitious. So first they would seize the town and capture the German NCOs and officers. The latter would be executed. Then they would move from town to mobilize the men that were stationed in different areas of the region in order to set the whole region aflame. And then they would move to the French coast in order to reach Allied-held North Africa, or they would fight their way across the Alps to Yugoslavia. Now, the latter idea was obviously fantasy, but the initial mutiny was actually pretty well thought out. In the night, the 16th to the 17th of September 1943, the mutiny started. The 4 ringleaders made sure they were on guard and they arrested the German NCOs. They then moved to a nearby hotel where they captured the SS officers. Now, 2 of them managed to get away. One of them was asked if he would join the mutineers, and when he said no, he was shot on the spot, and the other captured SS officers shared the same fate. 2 others managed to get away. Then the battalion's imam, Halim Malkoch, appeared to the scene, and he urged the ringleaders to calm down and follow orders. Now, eventually, he managed to release the captured German NCOs. These then took their weapons and managed to retake the town. In the ensuing battle, 2 of the ringleaders were killed. 1 was captured, and one other, he escaped. He eventually joined the French resistance and survived the war. The captured mutineer would be sentenced to death, alongside 14 other members of the SS-Handschar who had joined him. Once the German authorities heard of the uprising, they moved in quickly. They sealed off the town and they disarmed Handschar men in the vicinity, so these could not start an uprising as well. In the following days, 4 Bosnian members of the SS-Handschar tried to desert, but they were hunted down, captured and executed. And thus ended the short-lived, one and only Waffen-SS mutiny in history. The mutiny was a unique affair, and it happened because there were 4 ringleaders who beforehand planned this uprising. And that was the reason why the mutiny did not succeed. They were not riding a popular wave of anger among the troops, as their commander, the hugely energetic Zauberswijk, had dealt with the issues of discontent to a great degree. Upon hearing about the mutiny, Himmler acknowledged his disappointment, but believed it was an isolated incident. By purging unsuitable elements, the division was basically still fine. Some 825 were sent to Dachau concentration camp. Some had to work as forced laborers, others disappeared in Neugamma concentration camp, and many would not survive. As a result, Hitler ordered the Foreign Eastern Volunteers, the so-called Osttruppe, to be dissolved. Now, this stunned German commanders, as they argued that without the hundreds of thousands of Soviet collaborators, the front would collapse. A compromise was reached, and a dozen of Eastern units were swapped for German units stationed in the West. Some would see action against the Western Allies when they landed there. In October 1943, the division was sent for training in Germany, this time in the safe confines of the Reich. The unit was reorganized. Another 1,000 volunteers joined, but the problems of the shortages of personnel remained. Some smaller units were disbanded in order to beef up the bigger ones. Also, German Waffen-SS soldiers were added to the unit, and these were more motivated and managed to stitch the unit back together. On the 21st of November, Himmler and Amin al-Husseini visited the division. Early December, its strength had climbed to 21,065 men. Its establishment was meant to be around 26,000. The shortfall of officers and NCOs remained. And in December 1943, the unit was ready for action. In the meanwhile, Pavelić's Croatia was in a perpetual state of chaos. The Croatian army was not able to maintain order. Heck, they couldn't even feed their own population. The Italians had surrendered by now, and the partisans had managed to capture much of the Italian weaponry. There were only 19,000 Croatian soldiers, 5,000 of whom had to be kept in the capital, in Zagreb, to protect it from outside attacks. The Ustasha troops were totally outgunned, but with the help of the SS-Handschar, they could perhaps turn the tide. So almost a year after its establishment, the Bosnian Muslim Waffen-SS volunteers returned home. They returned to Bosnia, and immediately as they entered their homeland, they realized this was not going to be a walk in the park. They were on freighter trains, had to drive really slow to detect mines on the tracks, and every time a train was to be standing still, there were machine guns placed outside in a perimeter to protect it from possible attacks. Each train station was a mini fortress of its own, with bullet holes in the building. So therefore the men knew they were up against some stiff resistance. Arthur Flaps, who had led the SS Prince Eugen division against Tito in several offensives, was promoted and given command over the 5th SS Mountain Corps, which had different divisions, among which the SS-Handschar. It was a mixed bag of experienced troops. The SS Prince Eugen, reservists who were too old, not suitable for frontline duty, which were in the 181st Reserve Division, and troops that were trained but had no experience in combat yet, the SS-Handschar. Flaps, he favored large-scale aggressive sweeps to wipe out the partisans, but he lacked the men. And his grand sweeps resulting in the partisans moving from one area to the other, and then once the enemy offensive had subsided, they infiltrated the previous area they had to pull back from, and the Axis powers had to start all over again. What Flaps didn't realize was that the key element of a guerrilla lay in simply, well, surviving. Flaps was constantly aiming at the decisive battle to deliver the knockout blow against the enemy. He also saw this in Nazi high command on the Eastern Front, where they constantly aimed, wished and hoped for the decisive victory against the enemy. They believed in a fight, a final battle that would secure absolute victory. But the partisans, they avoided these types of battles, unless they were able to win them, of course. Sure, the Yugoslav partisans did have to learn the hard way. They suffered many casualties and they would continue to do so. In March 1944, the SS-Handschar experienced its baptism of fire and fought the partisans in several engagements. There's many accounts of the SS-Handschar that say that they were not good in fighting and the only thing they were good at was committing atrocities against hapless civilians. But their initial engagements were actually very successful. They managed to clear a partisan stronghold in Borsut, and they advanced against dogged resistance at the foot of the Macevica mountains. Hundreds of partisans were either killed, wounded or captured, and it changed the military situation in northeastern Bosnia. In the following engagements, the men of the SS-Handschar learned that this was not conventional warfare, where the enemy was in front of you at the front. No, the enemy could also pop up behind you. Dispatch riders, lone vehicles and small sentries would fall prey to the partisans. Commander Zauberswijk then introduced a new tactic, the so-called Jagd commandos or hunting commandos. Heavy equipment was dropped and small units, we're talking about company strength patrols, they went into enemy territory to chase the partisans and take them out there on their own terrain. It's pretty much, you can compare this with what the Dutch did in Indonesia, in Aceh, with the Corps Marechaussee te Voet. Then Zauberswijk issued an order to his troops that can be called rather unique if you look at Axis conduct. Where it came down to was that he wanted his men to win the hearts and minds of the local population, because that was the only way how you can subdue guerrilla resistance. Destroying civilian property was forbidden. He issued the men that the rate of success was not to be measured by how many enemy fighters he had killed, but how many friends he had made. Now, do notice that there's a disparity between issued guidelines and the actual conduct on the ground. And do notice there's a difference between Zauberswijk and his superior Flaps, who saw civilians at best as a nuisance if they did not hinder operations, and would be treated harshly if they were suspected of helping the enemy. But who knows how the situation in Yugoslavia would have turned out if the Axis would fully adopt the method of Zauberswijk. In May 1944, the Bosnian Waffen-SS unit took part in Operation Russelsprung, which was, according to Yugoslav history, the 7th and last enemy offensive. The goal was eliminating partisan leader Tito. Tito narrowly escaped. I read they did capture his uniform, but they did not capture Tito, and thus the operation had failed. A decisive victory in Yugoslavia seemed to be off the table. The SS-Handschar fought in defensive battles. At Lopare, they suffered huge losses. One German commander claimed that the defeat at Lopare haunted the entire division. It seemed the tide had turned. In the following months, more and more Handschar men fell. In 1 week, 5% of the entire division was wiped off the roll. And then the news came about the Allied landings in Normandy, and morale plummeted further. Many men began to desert, and morale plummeted even further when the men were ordered to leave Bosnia. They all remembered what had happened in 1943 when they had gone to train and their communities were left to the tender mercies of the partisans, Ustasha and Chetniks. Ripping off their distinctive handžar collar tabs, the men either surrendered to the partisans and ended up fighting their old German comrades, any available local Muslim militia, or just sat at home with their guns on their laps waiting for the inevitable retribution. They fought last-ditch battles in Hungary, Croatia and Slovenia. And when war came to an end in Europe, they were ordered to march to Austria. Now, before I'm going to discuss what happened to them, I briefly want to discuss another Bosnian Muslim Waffen-SS division that was set up, and that was the SS-Kama. A Kama is a small dagger that's been used by Balkan sheepheaders. It was established in May 1944 and disbanded in October the same year. Himmler wanted to expand the recruiting of Waffen-SS men in the Balkan, and thus another unit was created. Here you see the full name. It was acknowledged that if these men would be pulled out of Bosnia, morale would plummet. So therefore they were kept in Bosnia, as the men preferred to be stationed in Bosnia to protect their local communities. Ethnic Germans were added to the formation. I read about 416 to 18-year-olds. It was no success and the unit was to be disbanded in October 1944. So what happened to the men that fought in the ranks of the SS-Handschar? Alright, it was May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe was over somewhat, and the men were ordered to march to Austria. Now, imams of the unit, they backed Commander Hans Hanke to be relieved of their oath. And Hanke, well, he obliged. And the men were relieved of their oath, and with their weapons they marched home. Little is known of what had happened to them. I read there were 2 accounts of mass executions by the partisans. These were mostly men of the SS Prince Eugen, the SS Handschar, as well as other collaborators, because the partisans were, to put it mildly, not very forgiving. But there were also men who remained in the ranks of the SS Handschar, and they all surrendered to the British. While they were captured, Yugoslav officers, former partisans, went over to the prisoners, trying to convince them to return to Yugoslavia. Some did. An imam of the division wrote the following: 13 British vehicles took us to southern Italy to camp near Taranto. There were 70,000 prisoners in this camp. We were held for 7 months in one of the worst camps. Many prisoners became ill. Partisans, TDOS officers, appeared on several occasions attempting to convince Bosnians to return. Some agreed. They were not forced. There was no coercion. With a word, one could go. I do not believe that any of these men were executed. Others found refuge in Western Europe or went to the Arab world, and they would later fight together with the Arabs against the new state of Israel. Now, speaking of Arabs, I did make an episode about the Free Arab Legion, Arabs that fought for Nazi Germany. Click right here, and I also made a video about the Croatian Legion. Click right here. You can buy me a coffee, see the links below. I have much more other content. Subscribe if you have not already. Like this video. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.